Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and most weeks I'm joined by Husky Harry, huggable homos who love film, to dish up some great discussion, we hope. Question mark, you think so? Regarding something near and dear to our hearts, that, of course, being movies. We love them. You love them. Hopefully that's why you're here. We also love comics. And what better way to blend the two than to talk about Justice League, the newest DC Comics film from director Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon, which is an interesting scenario we've talked about on the past in this show. I'm super duper excited to welcome back my co-host as well as a special guest who's joining us for this review. But let's start with the more familiar faces. Jim Pugliafco is here with us. Welcome, babe.
Thanks, babe, and welcome to the podcast, everyone.
And Will Lindis is back as well. Welcome, Will.
Hey there, super friends. So excited to talk about this one with y'all.
Indeed. Speaking of super friends, we are super jazzed to welcome back one of our friends from the Comic Book Bears podcast. You know him, you love him, you've seen him on our show a million times. Not quite, but we need to get you on here more. Bill Zanowitz, welcome back.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, guys, for having me on again. Really appreciate it.
So, Bill, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to focus the camera on you, A, because you're super handsome, but B, look at all that media behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Behind you, third row down, fifth from your left.
Third row down, fifth from my left.
What title is that?
It is The Beach Boys Surfin', which is a compilation of their earliest recordings, actually pre-Capitol recordings. Yeah, I probably played it once.
You gotta love a good media collection like that.
No, but I love archival stuff. You know, with if there's any new band I listen to, the first thing I want to listen to is what their first single was like, and I always love collections like that. So I'm kind of making a joke, but I love that. I love that stuff. So,
well, there you go. Well, we love randomly diving with you through your wall of media.
I know. Bill, last time it was the Anti-Nowhere League. It was, Punk from '82. So the whole family's in there.
You never know what you're gonna get, right?
Yeah.
So I also love, Bill, that you're rocking the Justice League of America T-shirt.
Yes, yes, and my Justice League, my satellite era sort of Justice League. This guy was never in, and she wasn't, and she wasn't until later. And he wasn't until later, and she wasn't until later. She never was. Oh, yeah, she was. I'm lying. Here
I was thinking
it's a Bronze Age.
Yeah, here I was thinking there's only one Justice League, right? And there's come to find out there's many.
Right.
You have no idea, Jim.
I don't. And maybe that's a good thing.
Maybe. Well, we are really just jonesing to jump into this conversation. A couple quick things though before we do. One, want to give a shout out to those of you who are joining us in the live chat. Definitely looking forward to hanging out with you guys tonight. Feel free to drop us a note in that live chat. Say hi. Let us know your thoughts on Justice League. Or if you're on the fence about it, given some of this controversy with the critics just like shit-shaming this movie, which I'm sure we'll talk about, would love to know those thoughts as well. So be sure to drop us a line. Not only that, but we are going to be talking about Justice League very briefly, spoiler-free, just to give you sort of our initial impressions, whether we think it's worth checking out or not. So if you are on the fence, maybe that will help. And then we'll give fair warning before we go into spoilers. Since there's a lot to unpack, no new movie news this week that we're going to talk about. I'm so excited. I'm fumbling my words. It might also be because I'm 2 cheerleader beers in at this point. Maybe a little of both. Why not both? I don't know.
But I love cheerleader beer, Brad. Like, this is going to be a delight. Bring on this episode.
Oh boy. All right. Well, with all of that said, you guys, we're just going to do it. We're going to hit that jump where Jim lovingly inserts the trailer for you, because you probably haven't seen that trailer a million times yet. What's one more time? And then we'll be back with some discussion. So all that said, here we go. Our discussion of Justice League. All right, so Will, you don't have to take a super deep dive, but just give us the plot setup of this film and whether you think it's worth checking out and why.
Absolutely. So Justice League, the latest movie as part of the DC Cinematic Universe, which is owned and produced by Warner Brothers. So just that conglomeration. This is the third or fourth movie in this particular franchise, or this particular storyline, following on the heels of Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Suicide Squad, which ran a little bit more tangible, and Wonder Woman. Yes. Wonder Woman. And so this particular film follows as a very, very, very close sequel to Batman v Superman, just in terms of like the actual storyline, where we have Batman and Wonder Woman who united in that particular film. We're in this age now where, you know, I guess spoilers for Batman v Superman, but I think we kind of have to. You know, Superman is no longer around. The world is in peril, and there's this new threat that's about to take over the world. So Batman and Wonder Woman decide they need to form an alliance with some of these other metahumans around the world to try to combat this great evil. So that's the setup. In terms of like whether or not you need to see this movie, or like whether it's, you know, good or not, or what have you, I think before we get to any of that, I think that it's important to note that just the fact that this movie with these particular characters who are so iconic and so important to so many of us, the fact that they are on the screen in this particular format, I think is very, very important, very noteworthy. And I think no matter what else we say about the movie from here on out, I think this movie is worth watching for that reason alone. Even sight unseen, just that is important to watch. I, one who actively disliked Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad. I enjoyed Wonder Woman quite a bit, just because I don't think that Zack Snyder has the right vision for these characters to bring to the screen in a way that is compelling and interesting and kind of gets to the core of these characters the way they need to. And what we saw with this particular film is a course correction. And some of that was probably studio mandated. You can see that there were a lot of tweaks and edits that happened here. Some of it is on the heels of Joss Whedon came in after a personal tragedy in Zack Snyder's life, and did some reshoots. And I think that all in all, what we have here, this particular course-corrected version of this film is way better than the last version. It's still not where it needs to be for me. I felt like there were some really large tonal gaps for me that just really hurt the good things that the film was doing, almost like just this albatross hanging around the film's neck. You can tell like the reshot sequences, I think, were some of the better sequences. There's a spot at the end of this movie, which we'll talk about in spoiler section, like the last 20 or 30 minutes, that had me like actively fist pumping because it nailed a character in a way that I haven't seen in a while. And that was exciting. But then there's also a lot of really rough things in this too. There are a couple of characters who I don't think they got very right at all. And it was hard seeing them on screen, specifically like, I don't know if this is going to get me lynched just because of everyone that's lusting after him, but I thought Jason Momoa was really bad in this. Like, I think he brought no chemistry to the screen, and he stood out as like the weakest actor of the crew.
What do you say to that?
Fighting words.
What do you say to that? Tell it to his face.
I will. You looked really pretty. So. Should you go see this movie? Yes. Do I think it's a good movie? No. Do I think that it's a step in the right direction? Yes. And I think that that means that this puts the franchise in a much better spot. I think this movie had to be this way and had to be a little choppy to clear the table and set themselves up for success going forward. So it does hurt the success or the quality of this particular film, but I think it's for the better, I guess for the best for the franchise as a whole, if that makes sense.
So, Will, to clarify, this is a soft recommend for you then?
If you were just acting in terms of quality,
to my head.
Yeah. Oh, in terms of quality, this is a pass. I think this is a bad movie. Okay. I don't think this is a horrible movie. I don't hate this movie. It's it just has enough bad parts that I don't think the good's able to overall outweigh it. But again, I still think it's a step in the right direction.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought you said that you should see it, so I was a little confused.
Oh, you should.
But that.
Yes, you should see it. This is an important movie because this is an important movie with these particular characters on screen altogether. I think that it would be like to skip out on this movie. If you have ever picked up a comic book in your life and you're wondering like, oh, should I go see this? You know, I'm hearing it's good. I'm hearing it's bad. You should 100% go see it. You should make up your mind for yourself. I think you'd be kicking yourself for not seeing these characters on screen. Whether or not it's a good or a bad movie, we'll be discussing, but I think anyone who has at all fallen in love with these characters at any point in their lives should go see it, regardless of what we say.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Will. Jim, you have the least comic booky background of any of us. If
I say that every time.
If we were on a spectrum, you'd be at the end of least. Then it would go me, Will, and then I think probably you, Bill, at the most. Which is why you're from the Comic Book Bears podcast, Bill. But Jim, coming in with, and I say this with love, this is not a bad thing, with your sort of lessened palette, if you will, for this stuff. I'm curious, what were your thoughts on Justice League?
Well, I have to agree and disagree with Will, actually. I can agree that this probably doesn't fit into the realm of like a good movie or a good filmic experience. But then again, most superhero movies for me don't fit into the box of good movie. Is this good entertainment? Absolutely. I think this was a really, first of all, I went in with low expectations, even after Wonder Woman, which I felt, I thought Wonder Woman was going to be like, they were going to give like Wonder Woman 75% of this movie. I really thought that going in. And I was a little afraid of that too, because I'm like, what's this point of having a Justice League movie if you're going to focus on one of the characters? But I give the movie props to sticking with its primary mission, was that to bring these super friends right together, right? And I think it was very successful in accomplishing that. And we can argue about the degrees of success. And Brad, just like you said, I'm a broken record. I've never really fully invested in like superhero lore or comic books, or really been into most of the movies, even though I watched the original Superman, growing up on TV. And I loved watching that. I just never really became part of me and something that I really grasped onto. But I did enjoy watching this movie, warts and all. And we're going to talk about all those warts because I think this movie has some really big ones. But some of those actually made the movie maybe more fun. I don't know. I'm trying to get my arms around that. So in spite of those flaws, and there being some really big ones, I think the movie succeeds. It's fun, entertaining. It's funny and rousingly interesting for me. One of the very few movies in the superhero comic genre that's like kept my attention all the way through. So yeah, I'm gonna cut it short here so we can talk about the rest in spoilers. I would definitely recommend people. I think this movie is worth seeing, even though I definitely wouldn't call it a great film. I think this is worth seeing for the entertainment value. And like I said, it had to have something because it kept my interest the whole way through. And that's rare for a superhero movie. Only a few have done that. Like the first Guardians of the Galaxy did that for me. I think the second Avengers movie did that for me. But yeah, and Wonder Woman did that for me. But yeah, definitely that's a recommend for me.
All right, so we've got a bit of a split ticket at this point. I guess it's up to me to maybe see which way the scales of Justice League go until we get to Bill. I got to tell you, I really didn't like Man of Steel. I really didn't like Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice very much. Pretty actively disliked Suicide Squad. Loved Wonder Woman. So coming into this movie, Jim, like you had mentioned, with Wonder Woman being so great, I was a little afraid that maybe they were going to try and capitalize on that too much. I think they had just enough of her in this movie. I would have minded a little bit more, but I like that they struck that balance. I do want to give some love to a member of the cast who I expected to fully hate in this movie. In fact, you know, I try to go into these movies as fresh as I can, but I was prepared to just like hate watch every second of him on screen. And that's Ezra Miller as the Flash. I love Ezra Miller, so don't get me wrong. I think he's a great actor. But I tell you, I love the Flash TV show so much. I think Grant Gustin is such a great Flash that I was kind of like, maybe DC had a point for so long not having these movies concurrent with TV. I was like, God, how is this going to work out? Guys, Ezra Miller was my favorite part of this fucking movie. I think he was amazing as the Flash. I still love me some Grant Gustin, and I want to see the two continue to do their concurrent thing. I'm looking at it as alternate universes. That's how I justify it in my head. But I think he was a pure delight, a pure joy. So I love that something I expected to hate turned into the thing that I loved most about this movie. Definitely a lot of great, fun visuals. I do have some issues with the villain that they chose, the storyline that they're running with. I fully expected it to be someone else. It wasn't. And I was like, why? Why would you make that choice? We can talk about that a little bit maybe. But yeah, I mean, I like this movie a whole lot more than I thought I would, given my experiences with the prior films. Whether that's because of some studio mandated changes, whether that's because, you know, Joss Whedon kind of inserted his own feel and flavor into some of these things with some reshoots and some changes. I don't know. It's hard to say. But I agree. I think this movie is a tremendous step in the right direction. And I would love to see future films sort of continue along the lines of some of this tone. I laughed. I actually laughed at several points in a DC Comics movie, which I don't know. I don't do very often. So I won't go on and on. I'll save a lot of it for spoilers. But I just want to say, critics, and I guess we're critics too, so I'm pointing the finger at us maybe a little bit. Critics are shitting all over this movie. Seriously, reading reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, you know, it seems to me sometimes like critics are just jumping on this because it's popular to jump on. They want that 160 character tweet, whatever the character count is at this point. You know, they want that soundbite about how bad this movie is. And when you look at Rotten Tomatoes, I mean, it's crazy. Like, critics are giving it a 41%, audience is an 84%. And not that Rotten Tomatoes is the be-all, end-all of it, you know, anything really. I just think it's kind of interesting that audiences are really enjoying this movie overall, whereas critics are not. So I'm kind of curious about the disconnect. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit at some point. But my recommendation, wholeheartedly go out and fucking see this movie. Did not expect to be saying that a week ago. So, Bill, how about you?
Okay, before we get started with this, I have to provide a thread of caveats, okay, regarding my excitement for this film. You see the gray hair. I'm an old guy. I watched the premiere of Super Friends. I know the date emblazoned in my head, September 8th, 1973. There's a part of me that has waited 44 years, 2 months, and 9 days to see this film. You know, that's not hyperbole. Super Friends literally changed my life. I was one little kid at the beginning of that hour, another little kid at the end of that hour, and this interest in particularly superheroic graphic literature, if you want to use a highbrow form, it has, though it's ebbed and flowed, it's always been with me. This movie has a lot going against it going in, because it has to function as a film, and unlike most films, it has to function as a quasi-apology for what's come before it. And I don't know how many films are really burdened by that. Was it the Justice League film I wanted? No, I'll never get that. You know, the Justice League film I want is them up in a satellite, the Atom on someone's fucking shoulder, cracking jokes.
6 hours long.
You know,
6 hours long. Yeah.
Yeah, and 3 of them are just them hanging out, talking, and watching TV. Yeah. You know, I'll never get that. But I think what we were presented with, especially given the very troubled production history of this film, was a very streamlined and effective popcorn movie. And I think with critics, that is getting lost. Some of that, I got to say, maybe we should leave this for later, but I don't think I'm going to spoil anything. We're in a year of exceptionally good comic book films. You know, we've had, you know, I absolutely adored Spider-Man Homecoming. I loved Wonder Woman. Other films, though I had some reservations, I all came out on the positive side. I mean, even with the Oscar race, we have a situation where Patty Jenkins for Best Director and Patrick Stewart for Best Supporting Actor are very real possibilities. It's been a very good year for comic book films. That works against this film critically because it's in another bracket somehow. I totally agree with you. Zack Snyder may be an effective creative force for an installment in a franchise like this, but in no way should he have ever been entrusted as the guiding creative force for multiple films. It just shouldn't have happened. I have reservations, as I said, particularly in the villains and particularly in one of the main actors. Not the one that Will cited, but I think that if and some of this also I have to say, and Will, I'd be really interested to see what happens when you go through this process. I saw the film in 2D, immediately sneaked into an IMAX showing, and the second time, the first time I was a critic, the second time I enjoyed myself. And I didn't see as many flaws because I wasn't necessarily looking for them. I wasn't looking for mischaracterizations or where, okay, is this Whedon dialogue married to Snyder graphics? Those elements weren't there. I was just a participant seeing the film, and it was so much more enjoyable that second time. Given the situation that the film is in with the relatively low first weekend box office, I really hope that this is one of those situations. And people have to remember Wonder Woman was a bit of a slow burn too.
Yep.
That was a tremendous during the week film. And a tremendous level of women that came out to see that on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. With people back for the holidays from college and not being bound by a study schedule. Hopefully they'll take 2 hours out and see the film and get away from their parents. I think there are some factors where you may see a very vibrant second weekend, and I hope it gets that, because I do think for the marks that the film needed to hit, it did it. Again,
you mean creatively? Well, you mean creatively?
Yes, creatively.
Yeah.
It was rousing in parts. It was wonderful seeing this franchise get one particular character right, and we can talk about that during the spoilers section. But I do think that people should look at the fan score over the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and let that be the basis for whether they're on the fence about seeing the film. I think it was I keep going back to Wonder Woman, but at least with this film, you can say that there was a DC Universe film that was fun, and I'm so happy to see that, and I'm so hoping that the mechanics work, that we'll actually get a second Justice League film, because I think that would blow people away, because they're not going to be anchored by the problems that the first two installments, the third a little bit off to the side, presented for launching a franchise like this, which they hope has legs for years and years and years. So,
all right,
okay,
yeah, Bill, that was great. I guess I know I read the stuff about the box office, and it's underperforming, blah blah blah. I guess in the end, I don't really worry too much about that. I mean, nowadays the algorithms are such that they can predict a movie's performance in the first couple of days that it's out, right? And guess what? Those projections sometimes are right on, and sometimes they're kind of off. And the movie's going to make what the movie's going to make. But like you said at the beginning with your caveats, I think the Wonder Woman helped this movie. Obviously, the success of Wonder Woman helped this movie. But I think the two movies before that are still hurting this movie to some degree. So, in terms of trying to get people kind of onto this franchise's bandwagon. So, I mean, all that aside, and put that all in the pot, I guess I just don't really worry too much about it. It is what it is. We go in, the four of us or whatever, and we either enjoy it or we don't enjoy it. And just like any movie. So
Yeah.
And in terms of box office overall, too, I mean, it takes a monumental flop to hurt the momentum of these franchises. Like, and we have seen that. We saw what happened after the second of the new Spider-Man movies came out, and that immediately like slammed the brakes on what Sony was doing with its like 6 Spider-Man movie plan, which is we've talked about before. And the same with like the Dark Universe stuff after the Mummy, like that slammed the brakes there. This isn't at that tier. It's making money. It's gone over 100 million already, and we are 1 weekend in, and we're going up on Thanksgiving. This is a franchise that this was originally going to be they were originally going to make 2 movies, and then because of some production stuff, they crammed all of that into 1 movie. I think that's why we got the villain we got. I think that's why some of the stuff, like some of the pacing, was kind of wonky. And they even turned that 3-hour cut. They mandated it down to a 2-hour edit. So all of those things came into it. I think because it's doing well enough in terms of just like positivity outside of the critical stuff. I think there's enough goodwill at this. I think that it would justify them doing another one of these. Even if this one doesn't just rake in all of the money in the world, I think it's going to do well enough that we will see another Justice League movie. And that's the one I'm excited for, because I think that to your point, Bill, they've cleared the table. They had to fix all of the stuff from the previous movies, and that hurt this movie, but it's going to help set things up for success going forward. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, whatever the next Justice League movie is.
And it's also worth mentioning, and this is something that's not really reported too often, both the DC and Marvel films do very well still on home video, unlike a lot of films. I mean, you basically have Disney and those two conceits that still are a presence. I believe Man of Steel was even the #1 Blu-ray that year.
Yeah, they just got to stop making.
They still do very well.
They just got to stop making $300 million movies. I mean, it just puts so much pressure on the movie and puts the focus in an area of box office and blah 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 and all this stuff, and not on the film itself. And I think that's unfortunate.
So be on the lookout for 2020's Flash movie. It has a budget of $15,000. It's in black and white, and it's going to be a character introspective.
A noir.
It's just actual Ezra Miller just kind of sprinting across a parking lot. Like it's going to look like a college student. Like, at one point he'll just like stare at an apple for 30 minutes.
There you go.
I have the best Flash movie with Ezra Miller.
We need to talk about Barry.
He's delivering Christmas gifts to each of the Justice League members, and just hangs with them for about 10 minutes. That'll be the best film.
Or that could be our Christmas Life special episode.
Nice.
Nice. Who's the modern equivalent of B. Arthur then?
Jeffrey Tambor.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I know.
Not anymore.
I mean, being fully transparent about the situation. Sorry. All right. Hey, check it out. We're going to move on to spoilers because there's a lot we want to talk about, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. So, man, we've got a ton of folks hanging out with us live right now. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you value your virginal innocence, now would be the time, and I will awkwardly mumble for a few minutes to give you time. Now's the time to step away, maybe put us on mute, come back in about 42 minutes for some plugs. Or if you're listening on digital tape delay, several days in the future, feel free to skip ahead using the time index. But guys, spoilers are officially fair game. Bill Zanowitz, as our beloved, as our esteemed, as our well-lauded guest from the Comic Book Bears podcast, you have the honor. Where do you want to start with spoilers?
Oh, I think we should start with spoilers where in terms of the narrative, the actual first, the earliest action that Diana presented in the flashback of what led to the situation. And I'd like to talk first about the Steppenwolf's first invasion, because that provided me with my first moment. Within the storyline, Steppenwolf has actually invaded Earth previously, And it took the combined efforts of the Amazons, the Atlanteans, what do they call it? The tribes of men?
Yeah.
The Olympian gods, and the Green Lanterns to defeat him. And that was I really like that device. I really like that device to bring in another area of the franchise for future use in a very economic way that was still a crowd pleaser. I don't know what it was like when you guys saw the film, but there was cheering, and I really hit my other half. Like I shouldn't have gone that heavy there. So in terms of spoilers, if you were looking for Green Lantern, you get it in a certain way. But with the storyline, I guess we should just get this out of the way. The principal problem is the villain. It's an unspectacular villain in Steppenwolf. Kieran Hart, I don't know why they didn't use him merely as the voice and the facial recognition. He's a very good actor. And he could have done this part without all that CGI bullshit. And this was unfortunately one area where you did have carryover from Batman v Superman, that instead of a villain that was formidable and was something that you could recognize, we had another, CGI poo-poo monster in a sense. Makes for a cute pop. He does. But it was really for me the most ineffective part of the film. And again, this is another area where Justice League is damned if it does, damned if it doesn't. The principal villain from Apocalypse, where Steppenwolf is from, is Darkseid. And for the uninformed, Darkseid is going to look exactly like Thanos. Yeah. And I don't know if that ever is a character that DC can really use to its full potential. And another shame about Steppenwolf is if you follow the comics, he's actually a very interesting character. There have been two different interpretations of him that were really nuanced. He's Darkseid's nephew, yet he's also an underling because of political machinations. There's something there. And in one of the most recent iterations, he has taken over an alternative parallel Earth, and some of it was not from him warring and decimating, but because of his sheer charm. And there was really an opportunity there to use those concepts. Instead, we got, we got a poo monster.
I think it's fans of the comics who had. Now, granted, this was a thin villain no matter how many ways you slice it. The more of a fan of the comics you are, I think the more issue you had with the villain. For us uninitiated who don't know Darkseid from Lightside, we're like, oh, great. There's another villain. We don't know. He wants to take over the world, blah, blah, blah. He's got a hat he had kind of a cool hat, but it wasn't as cool as the Thor villain's hat. Her hat had more points, so it was much cooler. But both villains really, villains in these movies, these movies all most of them have a real problem with villains. And they seem to be, if the worst thing you could say about this movie is that the villain was weak, you're not really saying a lot when taken in context of these movies. Because I think they were all pretty bad. What I couldn't get over was why they made him CGI face.
That was my biggest problem.
Why? You're right. Why, Bill and Will? Why couldn't they just give him, give an actor, slap some makeup on him and make him menacing and cool? It was obviously cartoonish, and I think that kind of took me out of some scenes, unfortunately. Even if the character was weak as a villain, I can accept that in these movies. But when it looks so bad, it's almost like you didn't put effort into making him a real villain. But that's me.
Especially when the CGI, the CGI did not look like modern good CGI. Like it looked like CGI, like for Steppenwolf himself, you know, from like 5-6 years ago. He looked like a video game cutscene from like, you know, PlayStation 3 era, surrounded by these live action people. And he didn't need
and
to.
yet the Parademons looked fantastic.
They did. They really did.
They looked fantastic.
And there was no need for this character to have this CGI. I think about him just in terms of his role in the story and what he did. This character was almost exactly like Ronan the Accuser from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Just he's the guy that the team has to fight because they're both going after the same space thing. Like, but one of the things, and Ronan the Accuser was not a great villain in that Guardians of the Galaxy movie either. Like that's one of the weak spots of that movie. But the design looked a lot better just because they used more practical makeup and practical costuming, and that's what I wanted here. Like you could have improved this movie by a good step just by putting a dude in in the chair for 6 hours and make-upping the hell out of him. The hat is what makes Steppenwolf.
The has to have a cool hat.
Yeah, the hat is the hat is the defining element to Steppenwolf. In fact, a lot of the illustrations that I've seen, it's just like a dude with a goatee and like a really cool hat, you know? Like, and so I mean, they obviously aliened him up a bit, you know, that's cool. But yeah, this really needed some practical effects. I did love that scene, Bill. You're right. Like we had these set pieces set across the history of Steppenwolf and the Mother Box and all that stuff. And so we saw this cool backstory with, you know, everyone joining together. And that was like a fist pump moment too. Like that was the great way to kind of test the waters with Green Lantern and say, yeah, we know the Ryan Reynolds one's sucked. But this is an opportunity for us to maybe, you know, kind of plant the seed. These guys will be coming. Followed by another, there was another scene in this movie that featured the Amazons, and that was another one of the highlights to me. I think that just kind of how badass all of those women were just in that fight, even though like that the purpose of that scene was Steppenwolf shows up, he just kicks the shit out of all of them, and by the end of it has this box. But in doing so, like the fight that they put up and the things that they're doing and shooting the arrow and it's dragging the box and they're doing all of that stuff was really well choreographed and looked super sharp. Like, and it's so weird for me that like, you know, like that looked so good and then that villain looked so bad. Like, I just wish he looked a little better.
Yeah, it was way better than what we get in most of these movies, which is a bunch of superheroes like bashing into stuff like all the time, you know, buildings or vehicles or whatever. I really think that sequence worked as an action sequence, even if the villain himself, you know, looked a little weak or visually looked kind of cheesy. I thought I felt something in those scenes. I felt stakes. Maybe those stakes weren't real or they were totally made up, but I felt something. I wanted, you know, I was rooting for those people to come together and save the MacGuffin, you know, the Mother Box. Totally, that's another whole area of plot weakness we can get into. But again, like in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck those 3 boxes were. Why were there 3 of them? Like, but then again, there's the gauntlet thing with all the stones, and like I don't know if I fully understand that yet either. So I don't know. It's just another thing that I just have to like accept that this is the thing that everyone's after. Okay, let's see how much fun we can have.
Brad, I have a question for you because I know that we're in spoilers, and so this film also features, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it beforehand, the return of Superman. And we get to see him come across in a few different ways through the course of this movie after his resurrection. I know that one of your big concerns when we watched Man of Steel, I remember we talked about this in that episode, like he didn't feel like your Superman. Like you didn't feel those like feelings of like hope and inspiration that like your Superman gave you. Was this iteration of Superman any better for you?
It was a step forward for a couple reasons. One, it seemed like they brightened up his costume, which maybe sounds like a dumb thing. Like, how does it affect the character? But his suit looked a little brighter blue. His cape looked a little more like majestic red. So visually speaking, it was less like dark and broody and a little more like bright and inspiring. I think once he sort of comes back from his like rejuvenated from death rage attack thing, yes, to some degree, I think they took some efforts to kind of lighten the character a little bit. I do like that we got very little Superman and Lois Lane interaction, because as much as I love Amy Adams, the less I can see of them interacting together, the better for me. That chemistry just doesn't work. But some of the cool things I liked about the character in this movie compared to others is he's like making some jokes. Like he saves someone and he's like, "You're welcome." He's like, "I got you." You know what I mean? And those are some fun things from the comics that I think you can bring into these saves and you can bring into these fights, not necessarily having to go super ham-fisted in the other direction. Oh, let's make him a paragon of light now. But I mean, you can add some little touches, sprinkle some things in. I did see some efforts by this Superman to avoid some collateral damage later on in the movie with some of the parademons. You see him like grab them and like fly up, for instance, instead of flying through 25 buildings. So, Will, to your question, that was a long-winded answer. I'm sorry, but I feel like we're taking some baby steps in that direction. I'd love to see it continue.
Yeah, one of the questions I asked was, this movie opens with kind of almost like shortly after the end of Batman versus Superman, and it seems like much of the world, or there's a lot of mourning. There's a lot of sense of mourning for the loss of Superman. I probably should have watched BVS before I watched this movie so that I could get that continuity, but I don't remember if they quite left it at that tone with Superman's death in spoilers for BVS, Superman's death at the end of BVS. Was there that sense of, oh, the world's going to be plunged into mourning for Superman?
I think that was actually one of my problems with this movie. And again, like it's a problem with the film, but it comes from their course correction. I feel like they set up some things where they expected us to believe a few things that they did not set up in the first two films. For example, like the idea behind this movie is, or the setup to this movie is, Superman is dead, and because of that, hope is gone. The world is going downhill. People just don't have that thing to cling on to.
Right.
And that is,
and importantly, that left the situation with the mother boxes as well, because Alien Forces did see an opening.
Yeah. And so we're expected to believe that this is how humanity feels. The problem I have with that is that's not what we saw in the last ones. Like Superman wasn't this beacon of hope. The world was already kind of fucked in the first two movies. Like the world, it was like a grim, dark, kind of shitty world that Superman walked in. He walked around in the first in Man of Steel. He was like hiding from the world, so he's not a beacon of hope. And then in Batman v Superman, he was just like weary of the world. So the fact that we've lost this inspirational beacon, like we didn't see that, so I couldn't feel connected to that because
it's like there's a movie we didn't see between the two of them.
Right.
There's a movie there where he's this paragon of just virtue that just didn't show up for us. So that felt false to me. That said, I mentioned before, like the last 20 minutes of this movie had me just absolutely fist pumping, and it's because this was the version of Superman I've been wanting to see. Like this Superman, he smiled, which sometimes was weird because they CGI removed like his mustache during the reshoots.
Right.
That sucked. Like that sucked. But there's this thing that happens when he gets resurrected and he comes back kind of like oh, I'm a monster for a minute, and then he normalizes. Right before that, they say, hey, when you die and you come back different. Something's changed. And something did change.
You might lose something forever.
He did lose something. He lost the chip off of his shoulder. When he came back from the dead, he's not a dick anymore. Like the Superman from the first two movies was this snarling asshole. And in this one, there's this scene, my favorite scene of the movie. Batman's saying like, yeah, we've got to go do the mother box because Steppenwolf's going to do the thing. And he stops him like mid-sentence, just like, hold on. I'm going to go save this family really quick, and then I'll be right back. That's
that was my favorite, and I since I saw it twice, I believe the exact line was, "Wait, there are civilians."
Right.
Oh yeah, the movie
Yeah,
is
and
definitely
that was yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just like even in Batman versus Superman, they were kind of going in that direction. If you remember, there was a scene at the end of that where there was a big battle, and they took it to like an unpopulated. They even mentioned, I think, in the dialogue, like, "Oh, let's go fight the monster over here, so we don't hurt anybody," or something like that.
Wasn't it like we saw like the view from like a helicopter or something, and one of the pilots was like, "Oh, thank God they're heading for that abandoned island where like nobody
right." So it was a continuation of that in this movie, and it was and yes, you could sense the tonal shift between these three movies. I think, especially between Batman versus Superman and this movie. Obviously, the comedy elements that they threw in here, which to me, I mean, yes, just like all comedy, some of them really land, and some of them might miss. I thought there were more lands than misses in this movie for me. And the ones that it didn't feel like forced, like we're going to make this movie a comedy. That wasn't what I got. I got just moments of comedy. Some of the best moments, two of the best moments for me that stood out was during the Dick Superman scene where he's fucking beating everybody up, and Flash is doing his thing, running around him, and then you get the scene of Superman like, "Oh, I see you," and Flash has that look on his face like, "Oh fuck, I am fast, and this fucking guy can see me." That was awesome, without any words at all, and I thought that was beautiful. And then the scene with Jason Momoa, Aquaman, sitting on the lasso in that one scene where he starts pouring out his heart about how he really, blah, 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 blah. And then he notices the thing on. The whole theater in those scenes like erupted with laughter.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, I hadn't heard that in a long time in a superhero movie. Even in Thor, I mean, it had some funny, Thor had a lot of jokes. But I just didn't get that much of a sense of like euphoric laughter that I saw in those two scenes.
Ezra Miller did do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the comedy for me. And it's because one, his line delivery is so good. He's very good at quippy. And his other thing is like his face is very expressive. Like it's a little silly. Like I was rolling my eyes, but like with a smile on my face, if that makes sense. Like he does this thing several times in the movie where he like is just in awe of something, and so he does like Ezra Miller O face as he's looking just
maybe a little overdone.
Maybe a little overdone, but doesn't matter because it was fun and like I enjoyed that. What I didn't enjoy in terms of the comedy, I feel like one of the characters that they did not get in this movie was Batman, actually. I feel like Batman, and part of it's because I feel like Affleck has kind of got one foot out the door with this franchise. He felt like, kind of compared to the others, his performance felt a little more phoned in than kind of the other people on the cast. But they gave Batman, to me,
what do you mean I'm not funny? Are you telling me I'm not funny?
I'm telling you, absolutely, Ben Affleck, that you are not funny in this, because there's so much that he does that's like, they gave him a lot of quippiness and like stuff where it's sort of like, Batman was expecting it to go this way, but Batman was wrong. Like, and so he actually felt like a very ineffective member of the team. I don't need Batman to be grimdark. I don't need that. But I think when the comedy of Batman that works the best is when his stoic nature lets other people bounce off him in different ways, or when he does do something slightly unexpected. He threw out way too many zingers, I think, to really fit. And again, I don't think Affleck delivered them quite well. So that was a bit of a problem for me.
That was probably the hardest turn in these movies, right? Was taking somebody that was totally joyless in the Batman versus Superman movie and giving him kind of a much softer edge. Like, for one thing, I was struggling a little bit with the remorse that he was feeling throughout the movie. I felt they piled that on a little bit too quickly because, I don't know, I just didn't get a sense. I mean, they were battling tooth and nail in that first movie, pretty much, in some of those scenes. And I didn't get, you know, it just seemed like that remorse seemed to kind of come out of nowhere for me. And again, maybe I need to go back and watch BVS to catch that. But he seemed to be like I don't know, maybe fighting too hard for the memory of Superman.
Well, maybe it's because they both, both of them have the same mother's name, right?
And that was not mentioned. They get a half a star for me for not mentioning Martha in this movie at all.
Bill,
I hate to tell you, do you know what Hippolyta translates from ancient Themyscira into English to?
Gee,
Martha?
I don't.
No, seriously, in that we'll call it the Superman dick battle when he comes back to life or whatever. I thought for sure the Martha thing was going to come into play again. I thought Superman was going to hold Batman up by the throat and like go to heat vision his face, and he'd be like, Martha again. But thank God they didn't do that.
It's like it's like Martha is his kryptonite. Oh wait, kryptonite is kryptonite. He's Superman. So one of the characters we haven't talked about, and I admit that probably part of it is because of the different characters I have the least experience with him in the comic books. I'm certainly familiar with him from the cartoons and stuff, and that's Cyborg. Bill, how did you feel about Cyborg in this?
See, this was the other performer, the other actor that didn't connect with me. And I don't think it's unfair for you to carry your familiarity of Cyborg over from Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go to the film, because you do the math. More people have watched the lowest rated episode of Teen Titans Go than have ever bought a comic book featuring Cyborg.
Sure, yeah.
That's the one that's in the public conscious. And I just wish, he can be brooding because all of a sudden he's, 72% technology.
And he hates it.
The remainder, and he hates it. You could have that. But I think they really missed an opportunity to get something closer to the Cyborg that, at least part of the populace is familiar with. And it really showed when he finally said, "Booyah." I don't know about your guys' screenings. Mine, nothing. And that should have been a throwing popcorn up in the air moment. And they really blew that. I don't think Ray Fisher is an especially interesting actor. I think there were a lot of other actors that could have filled those shoes, and even with the confines of the script and the format of the film, may have done a better job. I think that was a blown opportunity, definitely.
Yeah, and not only that, but also like his technology was a little too transformery for me. Like his costume is like something straight out of the Michael Bay Transformers movies in some ways. And I was kind of hoping, not that they have to necessarily go with classic design and the costume or technology that's part of his body has evolved over time, but it just looked really fake and hokey to me as well. Like whenever he would come out like in his thing, like I was just reminded, oh, this is probably like a completely CGI'd over thing. And so that would kind of pull me out of a little bit of it too. So, Will, I know your question was directed at Bill, but I think that created some disconnect for me that actually prevented me from connecting with that character.
I think the third element that I think that also creates some disconnect. So I'm the same way. I liked his performance just fine, but I think the character had some issues that I don't think the actor was able to catch up to. I think if you're going to play this character who is brooding about what he's become, I think that works better when you saw what he was. And we don't really get to experience that here. Our first time seeing him here is in his hoodie and just saying like, I'm a monster now. But we only get to see the Mr. Hyde. We never got to see the Dr. Jekyll beforehand. And even if it was just a short shot, like, I mean, it's cheap, but this happens in movies all the time. If someone's watching a home video and you see him, or like, like a video of him and some friends just like, like joking around or something like that on a Facebook page or something, like there's ways we could have seen like what the man he was before this accident.
So this raises an interesting question that I want to pose to Jim. And again, Jim, your lack of background, but also your recent background. So after we saw Justice League, we then watched the DC animated film Justice League War. So Jim, to this question, which movie did Cyborg more justice in your opinion? Get it? Justice.
Oh, definitely.
In terms of
definitely the Justice League War. But I kind of put them together in my mind. It's almost like I'm filling in Cyborg's prehistory, if you will, with like the football stuff and, you know, his relationship with his dad and never, you know, coming to the games. And of course, every fucking superhero has to have daddy issues, right? I mean, the whole fucking comics is loaded with daddy issues. But like, I kind of meshed them together in my mind now. Like, I was actually thinking like Cyborg, oh yeah, didn't they show in this movie that he was a football player? No, that was the other movie. So I guess I kind of stitched them together. I didn't, you're right. I think it's a very poorly developed character. But again, if you think about it, so is the Flash in this. They didn't have the time to get into any of that origin stuff. And I'm kind of, in a way, I'm kind of glad that they didn't. Let the characters develop that depth as these movies progress. And that's another issue we'll get into it maybe, is talking about, you know, where do we go next? Are they going to go down all these single story paths? I, for one, hope they don't. I want to see the team stay together and do more. I want to see them flesh this out more and flesh out the characters through, you know, seeing them react. Like, they left a part in here about the Flash that I'm glad they left in. And it was kind of toward the end where he comes back to his dad, played by Billy Crudup, who's one of my favorite, you know, actors that I don't think gets enough credit. You know, he's in jail and he shows him that, hey, you know, I'm making something of, you know, of myself. And he doesn't mention, you know, he's keeping his superhero identity secret from his dad, which is, you know, obviously he's you know, telling a lie there. But I thought that was a really touching moment. And I want to see them fill in these characters more like that than, all right, give us a fucking 20-minute run through of how this character, you know, came into being. I'd almost rather see it done that more organically that way.
When I think, oh, go ahead, Bill.
So I was just going to mention, you had mentioned, Jim, you had just talked about origins, and I will agree with you where we didn't get enough of two characters. With Aquaman, I thought we got just the right amount. Just the right amount to make you interested in his solo movie. I know, Will, you said you didn't appreciate Jason Momoa. I really dug Surfer Bro Aquaman. I really dug it. I think that works cinematically. Sure. At least in the extent of this film. I don't know if it can sustain a full film on its own. But I thought with the introduction of the Atlanteans as a presence, Amber Heard, my God, that's the mirror that was always in my head in the comics.
Yeah.
She was gorgeous. And, you know, it moved. Oh, I should say that. But
it moved something, Bill? Did it move something?
And every once in a while, those gears turn. What can I say?
Oh my!
Wow. But I thought the Aquaman content was just enough. Any more, and I would have not been interested. Any less, and I would have said there's not enough. That was one creative decision I thought that really worked.
And I think that, you know, one of the things that's so great about this particular franchise in this world and what can be done is, you're right. Like, I don't think I want to see like them follow. Like, it feels like they've been chasing Marvel's tail, and that's, you know, they've had to, because they had some flops and they got to certain things out the gate a little slower, and so they've been trying to recreate some of those things instead of doing the here's our occasional team movie and then here's all the solo movies per phase. Like, I would love to see more movies of just the team together. And I think about it sort of like the animated series itself. Like, there would be an episode where it was like, oh, the Justice League is now going to go to and deal stuff with the Atlanteans, and we get to see Aquaman's story in this episode,
Right.
or we are going to do Central City stuff because the Rogues Gallery is all doing stuff, and we get to see more Flash's stuff there. So I would almost, instead of seeing like solo movies for some of these characters, maybe except for Wonder Woman, because I mean, give me more of that. I would love to just see more League movies that kind of focus on one character, maybe as the driving point, but with the other, and establishing and growing them, while the other characters are almost the supporting leads to that character's movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yep. And you don't even necessarily have to get the whole cast together, because you can imagine how much money that would be. I mean, you could have a movie with, you know, Superman, Cyborg, and Flash, and then you could do a movie with Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman or something, right? Like, you can find ways to still kind of have some standalone movies while still kind of filling in some of those gaps. But by not having a 7-person ensemble, maybe it's 3, you get a little more room for some of these things to breathe and marinate as we're exploring the characters.
Speaking of, that was a weird thing for me that I was doing some research beforehand, because before every episode, like, you know, peeking behind the curtain, I look up what the hashtag is to make sure I'm doing the right one for the movie. And in doing so, I looked up what the original tagline for the movie was. When they first started talking about it, the tagline for this movie was "Unite the Seven." And we had 6 in this movie. So I wish I could. I wish I could like see what that, like, you know, what that, you know, there's probably a napkin somewhere that has like a bunch of names written on it. I would love to see what they are originally had in mind for like who the 7 would be. You know, is it Green Lantern? Were they going to do like, you know, Hawkman, or like Martian Manhunter, or someone else instead? Like, I just wish I could kind of see what that original vision was.
No, what it is you all missed it. You all missed this. During the scene with the Russian family and the lightning strikes the truck, like, it turned the little girl into, she's going to be the next superhero. She's going to be number 7.
She's Shazam. She's Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
Wait,
she's going to be Shazam.
Shazam. Nice. Yeah, forget some ancient wizard granting magical powers. It's going to be, you know, the Flash light hitting the truck.
Mariska Marvel.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, though, it's funny. I was actually watching for like a young Billy Batson to be somewhere, right? And then like at the end, we see him again, and it's like, why the fuck is this little kid here? And all of a sudden, Shazam! I would have been jumping out of my skin at that point. That would have been amazing. But I remember that tagline as well, Will. So at the end of the movie, I was like, well, wait a second. Hold on. Jim, how many people were in the movie? Like, what was our count again? So that definitely was a little bit confusing. I know we're getting a little long in the tooth. I wanted to talk about one more thing. So the stuff at the end, obviously there was the scene with Lex Luthor and some other stuff. We'll get to that in a second. But real quick,
you mean the
real quick, what did you think of the Superman Flash race stinger?
It's cool.
Heaven.
Yeah, great fan service, right? Because, I mean, there's always been this question, right, of between, like, who's faster, Superman or Flash? I mean, I don't know the whole history, but Bill can probably give us a complete lesson. But I'm pretty sure that that's been a forever question for fans of the comics. And I'm glad they gave it some fan service. I guess we can call it that. And I don't want to be too derogatory. But it was fun to see that. That question will never be answered, but it was fun to see them included, I thought.
The one word that I came away from that scene, superheroes. That's what superheroes look like.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. If I can interject, I just want to say that I'm in total agreement with you guys that did promote that this was the Superman I've been waiting to see in this series of films. I thought they got everything right with him. And, you know, even though there weren't too many Lois and Clark scenes, Lois and Clark and Martha scenes, I think the ones that were there were pretty effective. and I actually felt a little bit of chemistry between the two of them, which, after 3 films, they got to know each other a little bit, the actors. And I was not as turned off by Ben Affleck as Batman. I actually quite like him in the role, because for Batman to function correctly, he cannot be likable at all times. He's the one that's going to make the hard decisions where other people make the easier decisions.
Right, but you gotta have something to
find that really gelled it nicely for him, which was when he was saying, I can't inspire this team. Superman could have. And that realization for me, it really humanized him. And I really don't want to see Jake Gyllenhaal. I really don't. I'm quite happy with Batfleck.
Jim, you mentioned fan service, especially with that particular scene, and I would say that that's not derogatory at all. I think that, as fans, of comic books, you come in like wanting to see some of these touchstones. You want to see some things that remind you of the things that you love so much about the books. And some places do it wrong and some places do it right. Even within this cinematic universe, the last movie was... So you look at Batman versus Superman, and they basically were in this place where, okay, Man of Steel didn't do as well as they wanted. So you could almost see them like going, okay, let's take the 2 most popular characters and take their 2 most popular books and just mush them together. And that's what we got with, the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns stuff, with the Death of Superman, Doomsday stuff, kind of mushed into this thing, and that was meant for familiarity, but didn't really serve either of those storylines as well as they were. That's bad fan service. This right here was a quick spark of inspiration and fun, enough to make you excited about that thing without derailing everything else. If they wanted to do this poorly, they could have put that in the middle of it, or made it like a plot point. They didn't need to. They put the little stinger there just to make people happy. That's good fan service.
Yeah.
And another bit of good fan service, if I can just interject, which I thought was part of the charm of the film, was you rarely heard the characters refer to each other by the code names. You got a little bit of that with the Batman and Aquaman getting to know each other, but for the most part, it was Diana and Bruce. It was not Wonder Woman and Batman. Even when Superman returned, Diana addressed him as Kal-El. I loved that. I loved that bit of fan service, because that's what we're familiar with in the comic books. You wouldn't talk to somebody you're working with as a code name. They'd be Joe, and I really like that. And I know the Marvel movies have done it, but I don't think they did that as effectively.
I like that element too. I like
because it's like, and in a lot of ways, I think it's like so unfair to them, because they are concepts that are the differences are different enough that you can't make point for point comparisons. I always throw it back to something like James Bond and the Bourne films. Yeah, they're both these espionage spy things, but you can't make them interchangeable. You can make certain elements of them align, but in some ways, the DC versus Marvel thing, I just wish, continuing from the comics, that film goers can just appreciate that these are going to be 2 different things, and they really shouldn't be compared, at least in certain contexts.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and as a comic book fan, like, I think we come in, at least I do, I can't speak for other people, like kind of rooting for all of them, right? Like, you want all of them to be good. You want all of them to be successful. There's going to be some comparisons they'll be drawn only because they fit in the same film genre, right? Because superhero movies are have become this subgenre of adventure science fiction of themselves. And so all of these films, as well as some things like, kind of light science fiction fare, like Jupiter Ascending or whatever, kind of like fit in this this particular category. So there's going to be some comparisons, but I don't think they have to be used in terms of like if this one did it right, this one has to have done it wrong, and vice versa. Yeah. Like, there are elements where both can have done something right, both can have done something poorly, or one not the other. So yeah, I think that's the important thing to contextualize here. Like, I know there's there's that happens a lot. Like, oh, you like this one more because you like DC, or you like this one because you like Marvel. It's just like, no, I'm a movie fan who also likes comic books, and I want a good experience every time.
So speaking of the comic book experience, I want to toss one more thing over to Jim, and then I know we got to get onto some plugs. So Jim, speaking of your comic book experience or lack thereof, I love you, I promise. Do me a favor, tell the guys who you like touched my arm and you were like, oh my God, it's that guy in the Lex Luthor Stinger. Who did you think that was?
Oh, I mean, in the last post-credit stinger, I'm like, oh, please, Lord, like, don't let that be Deadpool in this movie, please. Don't let that, because all you could see was the silhouette of the guy with the guns or swords or whatever sticking up out of his back, and they didn't show the face till later. But I really did think it was going to be Deadpool, climbing up on that boat, and I'm like, what's going on here? And then they show some other guy, which I had no idea who it was. Brad had to tell me after that it was some other superhero that's like the predecessor of Deadpool or something. I don't know. And we get, of course, Lex Luthor. I think they're just setting up the baddies for the next movie. So
meanwhile, in the Hall of Doom. Not Deadpool. That is Deathstroke there at the end. But it's okay. Knowing nothing about the characters, that's one of the most fair comparisons to make, because as Brad mentioned to you, Deathstroke is around, and then later Deadpool was created sort of in Deathstroke's image, in that very much in Deathstroke's image. And eventually Deadpool developed his the Merc with the mouth and the comedy and stuff like that kind of evolved later and turned him into his own separate things. But yeah, early on, they just kind of looked the same. That's a very, 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 very fair thing to think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did you guys get out of that, though? I mean, out of that stinger, was it a big nothing burger for you guys? Disappointing that Lex Luthor's back? Or what?
I mean, I'm excited that Lex Luthor's back. I'm not excited that Eisenberg's back.
Yeah.
I
put it that way.
Yeah.
I
Just
always
put a
thought he
plus
was
one there. Yeah.
A horrible, horrible casting choice.
Yeah.
In a role that's easy to cast.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't mind him in the last movie. I thought it was okay. I mean, as a kind of out of the box thinking, the one piece of casting, and Brad, I'm sorry, I know we're running long.
All right, go for it.
I'm not really happy, and I know it's been a few movies now, and I love her acting, but Lois Lane, man, in this movie, Amy Adams is a great actor. I just don't see her as a good Lois. She doesn't bring anything to this movie for me, at least this movie.
But she's the big gun, Jim. She's the big gun.
The big gun only because of Superman's feelings for her. Nothing on her own. So I don't know. It's just, Amy Adams is great. I just think I don't know if it's the characterization of Lois Lane in this franchise or what, but it's boring.
I mean, we didn't see. This is the first movie where I saw of the times we've seen her show up. This is the first time where, and I'll agree with Bill on this, where I saw chemistry between Lois and Clark. This is the first time where I saw them as an actual viable couple. I think that part of the reason, for me, I'm not excited about Amy Adams as Lois Lane, but again, I don't think that has anything to do with her and more to do with the fact that I'm supposed to see her as this scrappy reporter, and I'm supposed to see her as this this fixture in Superman / Clark's life. Those are the things that are important to Lois, and we don't get to see as much scrappy reporting.
I wasn't strong enough, Clark, and we stopped living.
At least she wasn't total damsel in distress in this movie either.
Yeah, we don't get to see the scrappy stuff, and we haven't really had a chance to see the buildup of their relationship. So. I don't know what they could have done to make this better.
Maybe leave her out.
Yeah, maybe leave her out.
Can you do that imitation again? Because that was golden.
I wasn't strong enough, Clark. I couldn't go on.
I wasn't good while you were gone.
Oh God. Wish there was more just so you could imitate more. Oh,
Yeah, that was pretty much all.
Thank
all
you for that.
she had.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh gosh. Well, it sounds like overall pretty positive experience for us. We had our quibbles. We have things we really liked. We have things we didn't like so much. But I got to tell you guys, a week ago, I was pretty sure this conversation was going to go very differently. So I'm very happy to have been surprised by as enjoyable as this film was for me. And it sounds like for you guys as well, maybe to a lesser extent you will, but
The Rotten Tomato score for this podcast is 75%.
there you go.
Hey, we'll
We
take
gotta-
it. We'll take it.
That's how aggregates work. Just like
Attack of the
positive
C
and
students.
negative,
That's
yeah.
us.
But Will, I was also wondering, with what I had said, do you have any plans to see this again?
I don't.
Okay.
And mainly because there's so many good movies out that I could when I think about my time and the amount of money that I'm going to spend on film, and this also colors it quite a bit. I saw 3 better movies in the theater the same week that I saw Justice League, and so it's hard for me to justify going back and seeing a movie that I enjoyed parts of, but I overall didn't enjoy, when there's other that 5-star William Lindis 100% movie is is just around the corner. So that's part of it for me. Although I do totally get that inclination.
We'll just wait for the 4-hour director's cut Blu-ray release in a few months.
Here's the version you have to watch. The other one, yeah, you guys saw the bad one, but now there's a longer one, and this is the good one.
But at least when that happens, I'll give you my Vudu account information. You sign in, you watch it again. I really will be interested to see what your reaction is that second time.
I will get you on Skype or something like that, and we will watch it together, Bill.
Aww. There you go. In your underwear.
That sounds amazing.
I'm so blushing right now.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to go ahead and transition to some plugs. Bill, we would like to thank the Comic Book Bears podcast so much for loaning you to us for the show this week. Do us a favor, in addition to whatever you'd like to plug, also tell our listeners where they can find your incredible show.
Okay, for the Comic Book Bears, you can go to comicbookbears.com. That links right to our Libsyn page where you can do direct downloads via MP3. You can also subscribe to us through iTunes, and we're also on Stitcher Radio if you prefer to access your aggregate podcasts in that fashion. We are releasing a new episode tomorrow, which I'm really happy about. Apart from Thor Ragnarok and Justice League talk, New Jersey, there it comes, talk, sorry.
Talk.
I'm at home. I also start the episode off with an interview with Andy Mangels, and that's somebody I've been waiting for a long time to come onto the show. Andy has a slew of pop culture credits, but the most recent one, which he's actually on the show to talk about, was in regards to the year of Wonder Woman 77 meets the Bionic Woman crossover that was recently published earlier this year and has been collected in the trade. So that'll be hitting tomorrow morning. And I think that might be a very good distraction for people if they have a hard commute or want to, phase out their parents for 2 hours with the holidays. So consider that. I also have the comic book that I wrote, the Crime Fighter Inquiry, earlier in the week hit Comixology, which is basically the only platform for electronic comics. And you can go to Comixology, look up Crime Fighter Inquiry, the book that I wrote with art by Mark Parman, and you can buy a copy for just $1.99. $1.99.
Hey, less than $2.
Coffee, yeah. And you get 30 pages of story and art and heart. So I will plug that. And since I'm on the Movie Bears, I feel I'm honor bound to plug a movie and a bunch of new Netflix movies that hit recently. I watched Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, which is a documentary about Jim Carrey and his preparation for the role of Andy Kaufman in the film Man on the Moon. And the film intercuts between a 2016 interview with Jim Carrey with footage that was filmed 20 years ago as he was preparing and also actually filming Man on the Moon, and it is a very interesting study on how deeply and to what lengths an actor will go to get into a part. I also found it really interesting because it's not a film I particularly like or a performance I really connect with, and it was really eye-opening, and some really surprising stuff in there, and especially for people who appreciate the craft of acting, I think that it's not a bad way to spend an hour and 45 minutes. So that's the actual title is let me get this here because it feeds into the conceit of Andy Kaufman, Jim and Andy, the Great Beyond, featuring a very special contractually obligated mention of Tony Clifton. So
Nice.
And that's on Netflix. So
all right,
on my list for sure.
Everybody can see that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Bill. We'll definitely make sure to get some links in the show notes. And when I say we, I really mean Jim, who spends a lot of time lovingly putting all this stuff together for us. Jim, thanks so much for doing that. And
Sure.
Bill, I'm excited to hear about Andy Mangels coming on your show. I can't wait to listen to that episode. He's actually one of my favorite Star Trek novel authors.
Yeah, and we do talk about that because he did create the first effectively ongoing LGBT character in the Star Trek universe.
Nice.
That's been used in the what was the name of the series? Titan, I think.
Yep.
In the novel series, and in some novels where Andy wasn't the writer. So
Right.
We do talk about that. We do talk about his work with gay comics. We talk about his directing of supplemental materials on a lot of the Saturday morning TV box sets that came out. So give a listen. It'll be first thing in the morning in your feed because I get up earlier than you do, being on this coast. So you'll be able to enjoy that tomorrow. Yep.
Well, there we go. Can't wait. Thanks, Bill. Jim, what have you got this week?
I'm going to plug something also on Netflix, but it's not really a movie, so I'm cheating here. This is a series. So I've been on over the last year or so. I've been on kind of a true crime spree since Making of a Murderer, the Serial podcast, Crime Town podcast, S-Town podcast, the Confession Tapes. What's the other one that's on now? The series.
My Favorite Murder. Please tell me you're listening to My Favorite Murder.
I started listening to My Favorite Murder, but I don't know if I can. We'll talk about that offline. But what I'm really plugging is this show, which is actually not true crime; it's fake crime, but it's a send up of true crime documentaries called American Vandal.
Yeah, I haven't seen this yet.
Oh man, it sounds really silly, and it's because it's kind of got a comedy bent and it's satire. What it's about, it's kind of the conceit is that it's a high school documentary team that's filming a story about one of the students that's been supposedly framed for vandalization of teachers' cars in the parking lot, spray paint, 27 cars spray painted with dicks all over them. And it sounds like a silly conceit, but this show has some things to say, actually, which I was really surprised at. Beyond the silliness, it's got some really cool things to say about humanity and when you scratch under the surface. It's called American Vandal. It's on Netflix right now. Not a lot of famous actors in it. The most famous person in it is this actor that we've seen called Callum Worthy. Will from Bodied is in this. So again, American Vandal. It's fun. It's got some good meaning behind it, and it's very well made. And it's a great takedown of series like Making a Murder.
And it's crazy bingeable. Like, you're going to start that and then you're going to want to finish it like the same night or the next day.
I think I did it in 2 or 3 days, but
that's what we did. Like we like started it and we're like, let's give this one a shot. And this really gave us, me and Scott both, one more itis. Like, just watch one more.
Oh goodness. All right. Well, Jim, definitely a good pick. Will, what have you got?
So this ended up being like a really solid like couple of weeks for movies with 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing finally kind of coming out in a lot of areas. Last flag flying. That's last flag flying. God,
that's
man,
another movie
wow.
altogether
Wow.
that we could do.
Last Flag Flying also being out and being pretty decent, but the one that wowed me, just absolutely took my breath away, is this movie called Lady Bird. This is a coming-of-age drama starring Saoirse Ronan. She was the lead in Brooklyn. If you would watch that.
Yeah.
And written and directed by Greta Gerwig, who, if you've at all listened to this show, I've said, is one of my favorite people in the existence of people over so many different episodes here. This absolutely holds up. I love Greta Gerwig here. Her writing is so sharp and it's so sincere, and this is her first time formally directing. And it's this story. It's like 2002, and Saoirse Ronan's this girl like goes by the name of Lady Bird, and it's her senior year of high school, and she's at odds with her mother, who is played by Laurie Metcalf, who, by the way, both of these names are ones that are very, very, very likely going to be seeing kind of Oscar time. Like, these are some top-notch performances. And it's just this sweet, little, sincere coming-of-age story. There are so many moments in this that feel so real. It's funny. It's interesting. It's got a lot of heart. But again, there's like a moment. There's like this like depth of sincerity to this entire film, to the writing, to everything, where there's not a false note in it. One of the better movies I've seen this year, Lady Bird. It's in theaters now. It will make you appreciate the Dave Matthews Band song "Crash Into Me."
Oh God!
God! I'm gonna tell you that.
No. I'm out.
No. He said it will make you appreciate the song.
I have heard, and I have this experience as well, and I've heard from at least a dozen other people. You know what? I didn't like the Dave Matthews Band song "Crash Into Me," and it was used perfectly here.
Well, I was almost had Brad at the point of going to see this movie with me, and you messed it up.
I'll go to the movie with you, Brad, and we'll both get popcorn at that moment.
All right.
Okay.
I'll give it.
People can just give us the play-by-play later.
I will give it a chance, but here's the thing: my I don't know, a previous partner in another lifetime dragged me to like 100 Dave Matthews shows over the 5 years that we were together. And I fucking hate Dave Matthews. So I've heard that God frickin' song so many fucking times that every time I hear it, I start having PTSD flashbacks to like hippies coming at me with glow sticks and magic brownies. So I will say it now. If Lady Bird can like fix Crash Into Me, I will have to like, I don't know, give you a Starbucks gift card or something. I will be shocked, but I will stay open to the experience.
It's sort of like when we saw the Jesse Plemons movie where Other People from last year.
Yeah.
And they played that Drops of Jupiter song by Train all the way through it. And it's one of those songs where, like, in a vacuum, it's like, that's not a great song, but there's like a weird, it's weirdly super appropriate for that particular film. Just like this song is like super appropriate for like the way when she listens to it and kind of what's going on when she listens to it. It's a pretty powerful little scene. So yeah, Go watch Lady Bird. No joke, one of the best movies of the year.
All right,
it's definitely going to get seen. Yeah,
I have a feeling, Jim, we're going to have a little like Brad and Jim Film Festival Thanksgiving weekend. We've got several things to see. Maybe as long as I get some Skyrim VR in there at some point, it works for me. So my plug this week is a movie that I do want to see this weekend. It is the new Disney Pixar film Coco, which is coming out this week. Comes out tomorrow, Wednesday. Man, this thing is getting some incredible reviews, and it looks fucking amazing. I think I've only seen the first 2 trailers that came out. I avoided the third one that came out a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was a TV spot, whatever. I just started to feel like they were showing too much of the film, so I wanted to avoid that if possible. But I'm excited for this. Jim, I know you want to watch, what was it called, Book of Life?
Before we see the Book of Life before we go see it. I'd like to compare and contrast the 2 movies.
Yeah, so maybe we can do like a double feature Saturday or something, Jim. We'll figure it out. But yeah, definitely check out Coco in theaters this weekend. A lot of you guys are off for work. You're spending time with family. This is a great thing you can probably go do together, especially if you're hanging out with kids. I'm sorry if you're hanging out with kids. I'm not hanging out with kids, thank God. But if you are, hey, maybe the movie will get you out of having to interact with them for a couple hours.
So you don't want to hang out with kids to go to a movie to hang out with kids
that are not hanging out with kids.
Okay.
Oh goodness. All right. Well, guys, we gotta wrap this thing up here.
It's frustrating. There's so many good movies. Well, you don't know if they're good movies, but there's so many movies I want to see between The Shape of Water and The Post and
they're not
like
out
you said,
yet.
Coco. I know, but it's frustrating because this is the time of year that I just hate backloading. You know, I just can't stand it because there's so many films.
Well, some of us have no choice because we just don't get the releases. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like even Lady Bird, I think just opened in one theater here. You know what I mean? So
I will shut my
rough.
New York City.
It's rough.
Yeah.
Oh, believe me, when I was in New York last week, I sought out the movies that I didn't think would be coming here very soon. I saw Jane, about Jane Goodall, and Faces Places, which is another documentary that'll probably never come here. But it was great being in New York, except you weren't there, Bill. So.
I know. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Ships in the night.
Ships in the night. Yeah.
We didn't even have that like Sunday afternoon where something could have gelled.
I know.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. You're making motions like this. What were you gonna gel together?
I did that earlier.
I did that earlier with Mira. Okay.
Oh boy.
I really didn't do it with Mira.
All right. Well, we are gonna, on that note, wrap this thing up. Hey guys, real quick, where can people find and interact with you on Twitter or Facebook, Bill, if they want to chat with you?
On Twitter, I am at Bill Zanowitz, but I'm never on Twitter. Go to Facebook.
All right. And you're Bill Zanowitz on Facebook, so that makes it
Bill
easy.
Zanowitz on Facebook, yep.
All right. Jim, how about you?
I really don't think there's a second Bill Zanowitz.
And I'm Jim Pugliafico on Facebook. There may be a few others out there, but look for me with my Godzilla background or whatever, and you'll find me. What's that called? A profile picture? I don't know what the fuck it's called anymore. And then find me on Twitter at JJP Out West. At JJP Out West, and tweet at me there.
All right. Awesome. Well,
hey, you can find me on Twitter at Whatever Cove. I'm on Facebook, William Lindis. I'm on Letterboxd, where I rate and review films. William Lindis there as well. Also, you can find me pretty much every night on Overwatch, which I am absolutely addicted to. So hit me up. Play a game with me.
All right. Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter. If you're watching the video at iBradPro, the handle's right there in my little label. If you need that again, at iBradPro. You can also find me on Facebook. Just search for Brad Harris. I am not the conservative with the Confederate flag behind him. I am probably the one that has a few hundred like in common bear friends with you. So find me, add me. You want to talk movies? Let's do it. I'm game. But we have reached the end of our show. Bill Zanowitz, just want to thank you again so much for joining this week. Great to have you
for having me.
Anytime. And
I just love coming on this show. Yeah.
Glad it could work out.
Yeah.
That was almost didn't. Yep.
Indeed.
Such a delight having you.
So glad to have you here, Bill. And thanks as well to those of you who who
I'm
were
gonna
hanging
have
out.
such nice thoughts about the three of you right now.
Oh,
Making me blush. Making me blush.
Aw, let's chill together. Big thanks as well to those of you who are hanging out with us live in the chat tonight. Austin and Steven and everybody else that was here. I know we had a ton of folks that left when we got into the spoiler section for Justice League, which I actually take as a really good sign. I take that to mean they actually wanted to go see this movie. I hope they see it, have a positive reaction, post about it, which causes more people to see it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But guys, have a wonderful Thanksgiving if you're here in the United States. If not, otherwise have a wonderful weekend. We will see you all next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.
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 Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.